Thank you so much for joining us for Women in Horror. We are going to have a fantastic presentation this afternoon by Brenda LaTorre. Brenda is a Mexico City native. She is the author of Bruja's Nest, which is releasing in October of this year. Her stories have found a home in publications like Pyre Magazine, BDA Publishing Anthology, the Collective Visions Anthology, and more. She holds an MFA from the University of Southern Maine and a creative writing certificate from the University of California, San Diego. She was editor of the popular fiction in the Stone Coast Review magazine in 2024. Currently, she's enjoying her work as a writing mentor in the Write Hive mentorship program, which I always love to hear. I'm Alma. She, ella are my pronouns. I am a fourth year, I think, Indie Ink judge this year, data analyst by day, dog parent, voracious reader, and marine ecosystems advocate. Thank you, everyone, for joining us to hear from Brenda. Brenda, please introduce yourself and we will dive right in.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Alma, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm Brenda LaTorre. I'm the author of Brujas Nest, and today I'm going to talk about women in horror, which is one of my favorite subjects. So let's dive right in. Horror is a literary genre which we consume to feel aesthetic pleasure. It works because our body feels the fear while our brain knows we're safe. So it creates this paradox where we enter this state of safe fear, which is why we love it. It allows us to grapple with the uncomfortable sensations without putting us in real risk. And academics usually divide fears in two. They usually talk about biological and cultural fears. I want to add to this that we often experience these fears in tandem, but the division is useful for theoretical studying. So, what are these two fears? One is the biological fear, and it is related to our evolutive past. So, it would be like fear of death, fear of animals with sharp teeth, fear of spiders. And then we got the cultural fears that are more complex. And of course, since they are cultural, they will vary from country to country, culture to culture. But they are learned, but that doesn't mean they are less real. So some examples would be like to be humiliated, to be seen in the bathroom, to be naked in public. Um, they basically break social taboos. So I want to ask you, do women experience specific fears and both biological and cultural? Um, and I would say that absolutely. On the biological side, we fear pregnancy, menstruation, menopause. If we are a trans woman, we can experience fear of not passing, of hormonal therapy, among other biological fears. And on the cultural side, we also got female-specific fears like the fear of being followed at night, of being disrespected, of being judged, among other things. And I want to begin at the beginning because I know that women have always been creators of horror. So, where does horror come from? Uh, and I think the origin is oral tradition, which is the first form of literature. It's cultural, it's worldwide, and it warns us about bad things that could happen. And it has this socialization function to teach people how to behave in society, often through fear, like through the warning of the bad things, right? Um, this is where folk tales come into place, which are also the origin of horror. So I added some Latin American folk tales that I heard growing up here in Mexico. So we have Mometso Pinky, who we've been told takes off her legs at night. and she hides them and hunts men who come home late at night and have been drinking and have been unfaithful to their wives. So it's like a cautionary tale of being a good husband. We see the Bruja Ball of Light, which is a witch who appears in the form of a ball of light, and if you stare at her directly, she'll absorb you. And we also have La Lechuza. Here in Latin America, we have two types of owls. The lechuzas have almond eyes, and the normal owls have round eyes. And so lechuzas are always believed to be witches. And we also, like, something that I find interesting among these folk tales is that we see a pattern of women who fly. And I think it represents also like the fear of uh, women being free as a threat to society as well. And so from folktales, we then jump into the Gothic. The first ever Gothic book was The Castle of Otranto, written by Horace Walpole. He baptized the literary genre. But soon after, women began writing in the horror genre. We have Anne Radcliffe with the Mysteries of Udolpho. She invented the like what we refer now to as Scooby-Doo endings. We have Mary Shelley with Frankenstein, who tells us what would happen in a world without mothers. Edith Nesbit, who wrote short stories in a Penny Dreadful format. And The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, who talks about the threat of husbands sending you to an asylum because you were inconvenient. And it's also about postpartum depression. So we can see here, and there are many, many, many more Gothic female writers. These are just some of the most famous examples. But we can see how horror and the Gothic have always been a great place to explore and exercise female specific fears. And we have always, always created horror. Um, so I would like to talk briefly about the male gaze. The male gaze operates through three levels: the camera, which would be like the point of view in a book or the actual camera in a film, the male characters within the story, and the audience who is positioned to identify with the man. And so when books and films are crafted through the male gaze, they often portray women as less intelligent, bodies like female bodies as products, and they focus on body parts as opposed to the person as a whole. And this creates a double standard where we have unlikable female characters, but when male characters act the exact same way, they are seen as anti-heroes and they are admired, right? So male characters are allowed to be violent, dark, narcissistic, and ambitious, and they are portrayed as complex, even if they are psychopaths like Dahmer and Hannibal Lecter, and they are like interesting characters, right? But in the same sense, like if a woman is portrayed as ambitious, like in Gone Girl, or who wants revenge, or who is like extremely intelligent, they are often classified as unlikable female characters, which only means that they are women who don't adhere to social expectations of what it means to be a woman according to Western society. So I believe that a way um, uh, to counter this is to read horror created by women, which often has the female gaze. So, what is the female gaze? It shifts the narrative toward interiority, subjectivity, and how it truly feels to exist as a whole person. It makes women feeling seen, uh, being seen, and returning the gaze. So it's not just like using yourself in the film as a body part, but instead as a complex character as well. So again, horror provides catharsis from a safe place. And I want to talk about pink horror, which is like horror created by women. Uh, it started because people on the internet noticed publishers were giving pink covers to horror books written by women as a reappropriation technique. And it is a publishing and marketing phenomena, and it touches upon different female specific fears, and I think it's also a reflection of the times we are living in. They often talk about the pressure to be beautiful in heteronormative terms, like being thin, being very young. Um, it also talks about the insanity from repressed anger. Uh, it it touches upon the horror of the domestic. What happens when your home is no longer safe, when the person you trusted enough to marry is your own aggressor. And it also talks about forced pregnancies. And we also see this in film, but and so now pink horror has become this almost like this term that is almost a subgenre of horror, but it began with books. And so I'd like to talk about one of my favorite feminist theories, which is intersectional feminism. Intersection is when roads meet, and that's where Kimberly Crenshaw got the inspiration to name her theory intersectional feminism. And so this theory tells us that there are many identities that cross us as women, and that sometimes it means we have to face more discrimination. But it also invites us to look at everything with perspective and to dive into the works of different types of women and broaden our perspective. And I also like to add that, having multiple identities is not a bad thing. But sometimes it depends on the context. It can make us more vulnerable. So it's not the same to be like a rich white woman than a poor white woman, or than a woman with a disability, or a gay woman. And sometimes, like if you're with your group of friends who are the same as you, then like you're not facing a double discrimination, as opposed to when you are in like talking within another social group. So it's like not something that is active all the time as well. But sometimes something we will notice when reading diverse book with intentionality is that there are certain themes and fears that repeat across different groups of people, and they are addressed in different ways by these authors. So here are some horror books by Black authors, like River Solomon in Sorrowland, where people are kidnapped to be experimented on with mushrooms. And we also have Tamsin Mujir with Gideon, Tananarive with the Reformatory, which is based on a real institution where uh, young Black boys were forced to attend like for very minor crimes, and they were basically tortured, abused, and awful things happened in that place. And so something themes that we will see over and over in all of these books is inequality, discrimination, the ghosts as a metaphor to fight generational trauma and oppressive institutions. Um, with books by LGBTQA authors like Alison Rumfitt, Poppy C. Bright, Gretchen Flecker, Haley Piper, and Carmen Maria Machado, we'll see um, themes as identity crisis, body horror, like in Tell Me I'm Worthless, there's a lot of body horror and abuse happening inside a haunted house, evil institutions, because there is a lot of institutional violence against these groups. And we also see quite often the themes of conversion therapy, again, because it's a reflection of what happens in real life, unfortunately. But we should also remember what I told you, that horror serves as a catharsis. So in these books, we end up seeing like these monstrous places, for example, being burned to the ground, and people turning around, conversion therapy. So it gives a lot of satisfaction to read these books. And of course, we also have books by Latine authors like Cintia Pelayo, Vic Castro, Ríos de la Luz, Isabel Cañas, who touch themes of colonialism, colorism, discrimination, and um, and so we have all these different themes to counter like what we've lived through. For example, in B. Castro's Queen of Cicadas, she what she does is that she takes two different female characters who've lived in different uh, times, and so one is like a woman who is forced to work in Texas in a land, and she is abused by her boss, and then she gets revenge through Santa Muerte. So it's like, as I told you, like it's also like a way to create these monsters that will fight for us. And I would like to say that whoever controls space controls identity. So it's very important that we, as women, continue to write and create horror, because it's very difficult to center women without examples of how to do it. Um, we we sometimes have like very old fiction, for example, by Edith Nesbit, who, I mean, her work is great, but all of her short stories are about men and like the adventures of men and what men encounter. And I think it's a reflection of what sold at that time and also what she read. Like, if you only read things where men are centered, then it's very hard for you to imagine writing a different type of story. And so, writing and imagining different ways of being a woman of defies the patriarchy. If you write women who work, who fight, who take down institutions, then it will be easier for you to shift and decide you can do that in real life. And also, the erasure of women results in people thinking they can do X or Z. There are a lot of, especially female horror writers in the 80s who have been erased, who have come out of publication. And only now, with the internet, uh, they are like being revived, which is very good. I'm very happy about that revival. But yeah, we have to fight against being erased as well. It's not only us doing the work, like part of the work is also uh, keeping our history safe. And yeah, like our narratives build our cosmovision and how other people treat us and the opportunities we are given. So that's um that's what I would like to say to everyone. It's very important for us to keep writing. And I think that'd be all. Thank you so much.
Amazing, Brenda. Well, folks are taking note of how to get in touch with you and how to follow you. I know folks probably have burning questions that they're starting to put into the Discord chat. Fantastic. Keep those questions coming. Um, a couple of questions that came up for me while you were speaking that I would love to just hear your thoughts on. Um, as a big fan, a non-writer myself, but as a big fan of horror and especially of women who write horror and women characters in horror, even if they are written by folks who are not women or femmes. Um, I'm fascinated by, right, the women have always been in horror, whether as writers or as characters, and I love that you spoke to that history. And you reinforced really it kind of throughout this presentation, but from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein to Kylie Lee Baker's Bat Eater and Other Names for Cora Zhang, to Maria Turad's This House Will Feed, who is an Irish writer, to Silvia Moreno Garcia's Mexican Gothic, to femme protagonists being written by male horror writers like Stephen Graham Jones and his character Jade in the Indian Lake trilogy. I love kind of the themes and the tropes that come up with these characters and that women are writing onto their characters. So I'm wondering, what do you think, and you spoke to this a little bit in your presentation, but what do you feel like has changed over time, even if it's what you find most interesting that has changed over time, in the way that women are writing horror and are written into horror, right? So I guess that's kind of two separate questions.
Right. Well, I think we are starting to allow ourselves. I mean, horror is a very different genre, for many reasons. Like one of the things that horror is about is like breaking social taboos. So I think from very early on, like with Charlotte Perkins, for example, women have spoken about not being like satisfied with the positions they are put in. But I think it's becoming more explicit and people are finally feeling more free to say like, oh, I'm not enjoying motherhood, or I don't feel, or like I'm allowed to leave a relationship, for example. Like I think in the past, women just talked about being trapped and the horrors of being trapped. And here, I feel like it has shifted a little bit in being more cathartic, us being allowed to take revenge and yeah, and just being more active as characters and and choosing something different for ourselves. I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, and you're making me think of two books in particular when you speak to that. Agustina Basterrica's Female Characters in Tender as the Flesh, which I read in English, not in Spanish, but right, both the woman who is as shorthand, basically enslaved by a man, and his partner, right? And sort of the ways in which those femme characters interact with each other and don't, and are controlled by the primary male protagonist, for lack of a better word, in that novel. I was also thinking about, oh my gosh, I can't think of the name of the novel right now, but Grady Hendrix, who is a male writer, I feel like this novel came out in the last couple of years. And it's set in the 1960s and is about, hopefully, it's either the 60s or 70s in the South when young women who became pregnant had to go to special homes. And so it's sort of about the horrors of young motherhood and pregnancy and being silenced and, right, all of these kind of what it means to be embodied as a femme person in this world and how that has shifted over time. So anyway, my comment, my 2 cents, but yes, it makes sense what you said, and kind of lots of books I'm thinking of as you're speaking to that. Second question for you, and I feel like you spoke to this a little bit as well, but I feel like horror as a genre has always done a really good job. This is actually a great segue of exploring society's spheres at like particular historical moments. And I really love the way that you spoke in your presentation to intersectionality between femininity and Blackness, queerness, Latinidad, etc. Um, and the themes that arise within those intersecting identities. I'm wondering if you have, um, and maybe you mentioned them in your presentation, but any current favorite tropes or themes that exist at specific intersections that you'd like to expand on further, or that you really enjoy exploring as a writer, or you enjoy reading?
Yeah, absolutely. I really love exploring um, social class division and the fight against capitalism. Just because it's like such an unfair system where if you already have generational wealth, you basically don't need to do that much to be successful in the system, as opposed to like if you're born without as many opportunities. Like it's like from the beginning you have a setback. So you especially, I mean, I guess all over the world, but I see it a lot in Mexico where it really defines even what kindergarten you go to, and it's really crazy. So it's like basically from when you are born, right? And I also really like um, the exploration of generational trauma because it's also something similar, like you're already born carrying all these things. uh and I really like how Black authors address this, for example, in the movie Sinners. I think it's it's a very good portrayal of how it's affecting, like even though it happened uh decades ago, it's still affecting us nowadays. It's not something that you get over with, even if you weren't even born when it was like in its peak. Do you have other examples, Alma? I see you nodding.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you provided examples of a couple of those novels in your presentation. Sorrowland by River Solomon, I think, is a fantastic, right, exploration of that. As is The Reformatory by Tananarive Due. Although, right, like The Reformatory is sort of both Due's exploration of her own family's generational trauma as relates to the subject of that novel, as well as exploring how that trauma manifests across generations and one individuals who have passed on within a closer timeline within the novel itself. So I think you're spot on, and it's a theme I really enjoy in horror that is written by Black folks as well. So yeah. Um, and I guess a follow-up, and then we will transition to questions that folks have in the Discord. Are there any authors that you feel like are doing this particularly well that you may not have had an opportunity to mention quite yet? And I agree, Sinners is a film-wise fantastic example of this. Yeah, any authors, even if they're not available in English, I know, right, Spanish is your first language. We might have other folks attending who are Spanish speakers as well. Um, but yeah, writers, other content creators, whether they're filmmakers, podcast create, I don't know, other kinds of horror content creators that you're really enjoying as they're exploring those kinds of tropes and themes.
Yeah, absolutely. I really really love Las Voladoras short story collection by Mónica Ojeda. I I don't know. I'm not sure if the translation is subject. I know that it is going to be translated to English, but I'm not sure. It's a collection of, she's from Ecuador, from Guayaquil. And so she takes all of these folk tales that she heard growing up. And then she writes short stories that address specifically violence against women. And she like most of the stories are about violence against young girls, and it's, I mean, trigger warning, there's a lot of sexual abuse in the book, but I think it's very beautifully written, and it just it talks a lot about also the biological fears of women. Like there's this girl who has her period for the first time, and it's like a Latin American Carrie sort of situation, um, where the mom is just like, oh, now you're dirty, and it's just like a body function, and but she always tells them as a folk tale, and the point of view is from the young, from the young female perspective. So sometimes the protagonist doesn't understand what's happening to her, but you as a reader do. So I think that's also like a very interesting conversation that she has with the reader. And I also really like Maria Fernanda Ampuero. Especially, I saw that her essay collection Visceral is being released this year in English. And she also has a short story collection called Cockfight, which again, it addresses a lot of like the current problems that we're facing in Latin America. She talks like her very first story is about a taxi driver who kidnaps a woman. And it's like something that you hear on the news all the time, unfortunately. And so she she creates like a fantasy, but it's also addressing these very real topics. And well, in my book, I also really like to talk about the horrors of pregnancy and the complexities of motherhood. And one of my favorite films that I recommend regarding this theme is Huesera, which is it's not available in English, but it has English subtitles. So it's about a woman who, when she becomes pregnant, she starts seeing like this monster who cracks bones, but it's like a reflection of her own regret with motherhood.
That is a perfect transition to a mini question that I thought of while you were speaking, which is I'm curious, in addition to the complexities of motherhood and pregnancy that you speak to in some of your own writing, how some of these other themes and historical contexts that you spoke to throughout your presentation and throughout kind of our brief exchange, how do you feel like that shows up in your own writing and why is it important to you?
I love that question. Thank you so much. Uh, yeah, I mean, I think um, I do touch upon the struggles of social class. My book follows Yolanda, who is a young woman who sees this great life in TV. Like she loves telenovelas, and she wants to live in a telenovela, and she goes to an hacienda, which is this sort of like haciendas are a very charged with history. They were like an enslavement place for indigenous people, and people got rich by exploiting indigenous people. And I mentioned it briefly, but I think the ghost of being in an hacienda is also present throughout the book. Uh, I yeah, I also talk about how it's not only like it's not only that you are born poor, but also that like sometimes people on the top make sure you never get out of that situation. And also like the power that is available to women, right? I mean, we have more opportunities nowadays, thankfully, but there's also still more to do. And in the case of Yolanda, like she thinks her only power is to become pregnant with a Patrick son. So she does it anyway, or she tries to. But I also thought it was sad that that was like the only thing that she had seen in the media that she consumed, and like her um like her conclusion was like, this is the only way out that I can think of.
Thank you for that. Now I'm excited to read Blue Christmas.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'll give you a moment to kind of do some calls to action and shameless self-promotion here in a moment. But just want to thank you, Brenda, as a voracious reader and consumer of horror in multiple mediums. I am absolutely obsessed with the unique lens that women writers and women horror creators bring to the genre, the way that women and femme writers and horror creators reflect on society, comment on our lived experience as human beings, regardless of our gender assigned at birth or our gender identity, as well as the female protagonists in horror, like I spoke to kind of earlier, right? And the unique ways in which they navigate kind of the world around them and the circumstances in which they find themselves in horror. But I'm thrilled to have gotten to listen to your presentation and learn a little bit more about your perspective about women in horror. And want to thank everyone for attending this session, for joining us for Women in Horror, presented by the lovely Brenda LaTorre. Please stick around to ask additional questions of Brenda in the chat. We will have a live moderator who is fielding your questions and getting them ready for Brenda. And thanks for joining us for Write Hive this year. Write Hive, thank you for hosting this session. Thanks, everybody. Brenda, please, shameless self-promotion. Tell folks where else to find you beyond what is on their screens.
Thank you so much, Alma. I really appreciate it. You can pre-order my book it's available in Amazon, in Barnes& Noble, and many other places. You can go to creaturepublishing.com, and there you'll see listed all the places where you can pre-order my book. The audiobook is also releasing on October the 6th. So if you prefer to listen to the audiobook, that's perfectly fine. And well, just thank you so much, Alma, for the opportunity and your great questions and for hosting this.
Awesome. Well, we will transition momentarily over to Discord. Thank you all again, and thank you, Write Hive, for hosting, and thank you, Brenda, for your fabulous presentation.
Thank you.